Wings and L.A. Law return next Thursday with all new episodes. Now stay tuned for David Letterman's 10th anniversary special.
Believe me, I'm just as sick as you are about preempting L.A. Law.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
You know, one of the things that was distinctive about Green Lantern growing up as a kid is that, and it's going to sound absolutely ridiculous, but he's one of the only characters where, as he's a, you know, seemingly uptight, regular superhero character, he had hair that went over his ears. Whereas your main lead guys like Aquaman, Superman, even the guys out of costume, guys like Captain America, they always had real nice, tight and short haircuts that did not fit that 70s aesthetic. So to have characters created that had brown hair and brown eyes was like radical, and he's one of those. It's almost like the colorist would figure, like, why would I color somebody's hair brown? Why wouldn't I give it this more poppy color, either black with the blue highlights or yellow for blonde?
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Become a patron today. Patreon.com/wordballoon. For as little as $3 a month, you can really help Word Balloon keep going and get exclusive content you won't find anywhere else. Here's what you get. The Word Balloon Magazine, a digital publication packed with behind-the-scenes interviews, commentary, and insights from your favorite comic book creators, writers, and pop culture stars. And you can join the Word Balloon Book Club. Join Brian Bendis and me for a live monthly discussion of a hand-picked graphic novel. It's a great way to dig deeper into storytelling, art, and comic book history. Word Balloon has been a home for creator conversations since 2005. Your support helps cover production costs and keeps these interviews going strong. So if you love comics, creators, and long-form conversations, become a patron today. Be one of the League of Word Balloon listeners. Patreon.com/wordballoon.
Nice. Yeah, and it's a happy occasion, everybody. This isn't a memorial. This isn't a wake. It's a celebration indeed, sir. Well said. Are we ready to start?
Yeah, we're good.
Are we rolling? Excellent. All right. We can start. Here we go. Everybody, thank you very much for coming. We're really happy to do this. As you all know, Jim Shooter was a very important figure, not only at Marvel, but of course at Valiant and all the other comic companies that he created in the 90s and beyond. And of course, a wonderful con fixture as well. We miss him. And he was a polarizing figure, and we all recognize that. But he did a lot of good for the business. And I'll let these gentlemen who benefited from that explain. So all the way on the opposite end, we have a wonderful Spider-Man artist, DC artist, incredible guy, Alex Saviak, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Is Alex here?
What's that?
Is Alex here?
Not entirely.
Oh, okay.
And we have next to him, of course, a fantastic inker, but an incredible editor, and the man responsible, and thank you, Jim Shooter, for greenlighting Marvel Fanfare, Al Milgram, everybody.
Yeah. And I did a pretty fair amount of penciling also, I'd just like to mention.
Including Secret Wars 2 with Jim.
And Kitty Pryde Wolverine.
Sure.
The Avengers, Peter
Captain
Parker.
Marvel. Yeah. Captain Marvel as well, right?
I have nothing against inkers, of course, but I don't like to be categorized as
I beg your
an
pardon.
inker.
I beg. Well, certainly a lot more. A jack of all trades.
Thank you. Yeah,
indeed.
And master of none. So.
And
artist extraordinaire.
Another artist extraordinaire next to me, and of course we always have to, much like Dan Jurgens, one of the men that killed Superman, ladies and gentlemen, with Doomsday. Yay! Brett Breeding, among other credits.
Oh, that's me beeping.
All right,
sorry.
No problem.
It could be that's my Walter
from the Mill Cave
going off.
Exactly. That's Alfred, his trusted sidekick, telling him.
Low blood sugar. Oh, great.
Oh, yeah. Man. Oh, Al.
Yeah.
You need some Oreos, Al? You need my guy to make a run for you?
I'll take anything.
Any snackage?
At this point, yeah. You got anything? You have a lollipop, a candy bar.
Oh, is the lady coming up? Oh, aren't you sweet? That is lovely.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
That's very kind of us. Thank you very much. That's fantastic.
I'd hate to pass away on a panel where we're remembering Jim Shooter. It would just It would just
Indeed.
be very inappropriate.
Absolutely.
But you get to see him quick and tell him how it went.
Well, that's. I wouldn't know how it went.
Well, that's true.
So, guys, and Brett also a lot of down social time with Jim as well. But I wonder, prior to Marvel, of course, we all know Jim's incredible start of his career, where he was pitching to Mort Weisinger Legion of Superhero Stories when he was 13. He got the gig at 14.
Yep.
I don't think I could tie my shoes properly at 14. So, any insight?
incredibly impressive.
Any insight on the DC
Well,
years?
he had that problem too because he was so tall.
Well, that's true. That's very true. But he was basketball tall. If people don't know, he really is he kind of lurch. Him and Mike Richardson could have really been a good front line for a basketball team.
6'7".
There you go. Jeez, wow. But yeah, guys, did he ever talk to you guys about the DC years and Weisinger or anything? Any anecdotes? Not really, Alex. Okay,
Yeah.
go for it. Well, again, Al, I'll let you chew and swallow before you answer. But use the microphone if you want.
As usual, I bit off more than I could chew. I used to talk, because I mean, that's so impressive for a kid that age to be doing professional writing in comic books, which some people might have thought, well, of course. But no, he did very solid, well constructed stories. He learned under Mort Weisinger, who was, the head guy at DC for many years and something of a guru, and he had a very distinctive approach and style. Mort is the guy with, working with the editors that he had there, who came up with the idea. Well, he may not have been the first, but they would come up with intriguing covers first, and then they'd get the writers to do a story based on the cover rather than the other way around. Seems a little, cart leading the horse, but it was effective for many, many years for them. And they had these cover. I mean, when I was a kid, I wanted to see why the hell Lois's left leg was invisible this issue. I mean, why? What happened? So, and I mean, some of them were almost as absurd as that, and they came up with the whole notion that gorillas, intelligent gorillas, talking gorillas on a comic book cover would sell. And they had apparently great success with that for many years.
Sure.
And in the science fiction books like Strange Adventures and and across the board. But Mort was a driving force at DC for a long, long time, and
he was kind of tough. More beyond tough. I mean, he was kind of rude. Frankly.
He was known to be not a pleasant taskmaster at all. And Jim learned at his feet. Hopefully, not so much that last part. But Jim, oh, there he is.
There we go. It's all good, Walter.
Surprise! I'm talking.
Everybody, you all know him. You all love him. Another grandmaster, Walter Simonson. Everybody.
So
we'll talk about Weisinger, Walter, to catch up.
Yeah, the fact that Jim learned at the feet of Mort Weisinger, and anyway, so he was writing comics at that age, and it wasn't for Jim. It wasn't a lark. His family needed the money, and his earnings were really contributed to his family being able to pay the rent and buy groceries and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what his dad did. But whatever it was, he was not making a ton of money at it. So he may have been an alcoholic.
Wow.
I don't know what that pays.
But no, you're right. Lower middle class, or maybe even poor situation. And at 14, really had to provide for the family.
Right, and that's not that much different from a lot of the artists who early in the industry,
Sure.
The late 30s, early 40s. Here was this booming industry, and guys who could draw suddenly could make more money than their parents and help provide for the family. And I know that was always a motivating thing for Jack Kirby. I once said, "What's your inspiration for all these crazy ideas and so much?" And he says, "I got to feed my family." I said, "Okay, I respect that." So Shooter also needed the cash, and it supported him for a number of years. And I know fairly recently he told me a story that he was he taking art classes? He wasn't in art school, but he was taking art classes, and he entered some kind of art contest in the Pittsburgh area, and he won. And he could have had a scholarship to some kind of art training. I don't know if it was an art college or an art high school, what it was. But because he was making a living writing comics, he turned it down. So, and Jim often, he had a lot of very strong ideas about storytelling and how to do good comics. And in fact, the stuff he did early on writing for DC, he usually provided at least thumbnails.
Yes.
But I think they were that wasn't just like stick figures. He would do drawings to describe, instead of having a description of the action,
Sure.
which DC did full scripts, so that would have been your job there to write, Clark dashes into a phone booth, he rips open his shirt, he becomes, blah, blah, blah. Jim would just draw it and not have to write that part of the script. He could just basically concentrate on the dialogue and the captions and so on. So, early on, he had a lot of skills, both as a writer and as an artist, or cartoonist at least. And, that was very, gesundheit. That was very impressive for a kid, starting at the age of 14. The only person I know of who started their career at that kind of a tender age was Joe Kubert, who was drawing comics at the age of 13 or
Indeed.
14.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
a couple decades before Jim, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
In the
40s. It wasn't, he wasn't yet fully formed Joe Kubert, but still damn impressive.
Sure.
And you could see the talent early on. So, Jim sort of followed in that path.
When Walter, let me ask you, and also I want to know from the guys, all of you that did experience Life at Marvel, other editors prior to Jim, and Walter, what was your experience in terms of that period, if you were doing stuff in that period?
Jim remade the editor-in-chief position. Before that, there was I wish I'd kept a copy. They went through a lot of editors-in-chief. At one time, they were going through them every 2 or 3 weeks. And once they did, the rest of the time not. And somebody put a label up on the editor-in-chief door and had Stan Lee crossed out, Roy Thomas crossed out. And then, Len Wein, Jerry Conway, Marv Wolfman. Jerry Conway came back, and then Archie Good was like zip, 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 zip. And then Archie was the editor-in-chief for a couple of years. And then Jim became his assistant. And when Archie quit being editor-in-chief, Jim took over. So it was really, you're really much more on your own. Jim took a much firmer hand editorially than the previous editors-in-chief. Mostly then you were on your own. You just, you were given a book. You worked with the writer. You did your stories. We all kind of knew what the rules were for Comic Code Authority approved books, and that's what you did. And Jim had stronger ideas about input from the editor-in-chief level, which it could be good or it could be a little troublesome depending on what was going on. I've got a long line waiting. I'm gonna give one story and then get out of here again. But this is on the, I don't know if Jim would mind if I told this story, but he's not here, so I'll tell the story anyway. So screw him. That's right.
Hilarious.
So I was writing and drawing Thor, and I got up to Thor 351. It was the climax of a absurder thing I was doing, and I had a cover, and the cover was a large drawing of Thor, kind of cropped at the calves, walking forward, holding a hand, his hammer, and his costume was kind of ripped up, and his cape was torn up. And he looked angry, and he had to wait. Jack Kirby used to put wounds on people, and he would do it very graphically. It'd be like a line here, and a line there, and a line. He'd have like little cut lines sort of on people.
Like he'd been in a fight with a cat.
Right. So like a one-clawed cat. So basically it was, a lot of blood, but I had a lot of that stuff on Thor. It's kind of where I learned how to do that stuff. And Mark Grunwald was my editor. I didn't find this story out until much later, which was very wise of Mark, because what happened was the cover got done, Jim looked at it, and Jim decided that Thor wasn't handsome enough. And now my own thought is, he's been in a fucking, I'm sorry.
You could see
He's been in a fight. Of course he's not handsome. He's had the crap kicked out of him, and he's still coming back for more. So, but Jim told Mark, get John Romita to redraw this head. So John was the art director, and that was one of his jobs.
Sure.
And I gather from what I've heard from other people, John and I didn't talk about it, I didn't know about it at the time, is that he was not happy about redrawing the head, but it was his job. So Mark, wisely, had a full-size photostat made. Those are essentially photographs printed on paper, and it's black and white, no gray tones, really. And he had that, a full-size one made, gave that to John. John redrew the head. Then mostly he wadded out the lines, made a stronger jaw, and did some, maybe took out some of the cut lines. I don't remember anymore.
Made him prettier.
But he made him prettier. That's right. And John drew much prettier than I did, so that was okay. And then it went back to Mark, and the next day, the day after it was done, the book had to go out to the printer, and Jim was out of the office that day. You can see where this is going. So Tom DeFalco was the assistant editor-in-chief. So Mark had Tom sign off on the cover and sent out the original. Now, to be honest, I think if that book had come out with the altered cover, I probably would have quit right then.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because a great insult, obviously.
Well, don't fuck with my stuff.
I'm hip.
So, and I wouldn't have thought it was an improvement. So it went out, and a few weeks later, the book came in, the
final
copies of the comps or whatever came into the office, whatever came in first, and including the cover. And Mark's in his office one day, and Jim comes in, and he throws the comic down on Mark's desk and says, "All right, isn't this better?" And Mark, you ever heard that? And Mark said, "Oh yeah, much better. This is really, thank you very much." So,
outstanding.
So that was the end of it as far as Jim was concerned. I found out about it. I remember maybe Howard Mackey might have been the assistant. I found out about it afterwards, and I have the photostat with the altered face.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
And honestly, it's not all, at the time I would have just exploded.
Yeah.
I look at it now, I go, it's not all that. It is different. And I don't know if I would have seen it initially. I thought, probably would have. But that was how Mark got this cover past Jim. And
now that's a good editor right there.
So that was, he would, he might not be up front with the editor-in-chief all he was doing, but he had your back.
That's awesome.
When you were working for him, and yet you can't ask any more of an editor than that. This is more of a Mark Ruhl. So but it was very funny about Jim, and but Jim, as things went along, he would want more changes. He had one cover. He took out a black on one of the cover I'd done. He didn't think it was in the right spot, whatever that meant. And I didn't quit the book over that. But then I was writing and not drawing it. I was drawing the covers. But you could kind of see where this was going. And honestly, I probably would have been out of Marvel sooner than I actually was if he kind of kept leaning on me to change my art. Yeah. But that's okay. I thought, the cover went out the way I wanted it to. I was happy about it. And there were one other quick thing. Jim, sometimes, if he screwed you over, he would buy his way back into your good graces. Now, this didn't happen for everybody. But Weezy and I are nice. So basically, he did something on the X books. We were doing X Factor. Weezy was writing. I was drawing. Chris doing X-Men. And Descent, who was the editor. And Jim came in and raised a stink about something on the books. I think Annie remembers it being about maybe black placement on some of the stuff. I don't remember for sure. So what happened was, we were annoyed, probably pissed about this. And so Jim bought his way back into our good graces. He basically had Marvel Spring for a couple of airplane tickets, and he sent us to Angoulême in France, which is a major, major comic convention. It was then, it is now. 86 this happened.
Wow.
So we went as Marvel's unofficial representatives and got to go to France, my first time in France. We got to go to Angoulême. We had a great, the entire town turns out for it. I met Jeff Darrow, became a really good friend. Jeff's a phenomenal artist, one of the designers of the Matrix movies. And we went over to England, saw some friends, came home, had a great time. And apparently it worked because we had a great time. I remember a lot about Angoulême. I don't have any memory of whatever it was Jim did to screw us over. So it worked great.
These are not the droids you're looking for.
That's right.
That's awesome.
It was great. So,
that's beautiful.
Thanks very much.
Way to go, Walter. Fantastic. Walt Simonson, everybody. Like a gunslinger, he came in, shot the bad guys, he's on his way. Back on his horse. Thanks, Walter.
Actually, I could use a horse to get back to my table.
I totally respect that. Walter's going to be on the Fantastic Four panel tomorrow that I'll be moderating as well with Claremont, Hickman. Who else?
Engelhardt.
Engelhardt, indeed. Thank you. See, you got my back, man. Thank you very much. That's great. Now, and we haven't heard yet from Brett and Alex. Alex, I know you were telling me yesterday you have a great Jim Shooter story.
I really didn't have that much of an interaction with Jim. First time I'd say, I didn't tell John this yesterday, but the first time I met Jim was when I was working at DC freelancing, maybe like 3 years into my career. It was 1980. And I was living in Long Island and got the New York Times every Sunday because I was also doing some advertising work. And the New York Times had a very good section on advertising, art and stuff like that. So there was an ad that said, major comic book company looking for an artist to do special projects, comics, send samples, P.O. box, etc. So I figured, advertising comics. I know I had already done one thing for DC, and those special project comics always paid more anyway. So I figured, well, let's take a look and see. So I just took a couple of books that I had done and sent them off. And about a week later, I get a phone call from John Romita, Sr. And he goes, Alex, what's going on? DC's not giving you work? And I said, yeah, but I answered an ad in the New York Times, John. Why are you calling me? He goes, because, and he explained they needed somebody to do this special project comic drawn by Marv Wolfman. It was a 32-page story, a free giveaway, written by Marv, and it was going to be a free giveaway with AIM toothpaste. You bought an AIM toothpaste, you got a free comic. So, and it paid, he told me what it paid, and I said, oh, yeah, I got plenty of time. He goes, that's great. All right, so, when can you come up? I said, I'll be there tomorrow. So he says, because we've got a lot of illustrators that come in, they're really good, they show us their work, and they go, so tell us about Spider-Man. Like, what's his motivation? Who's Peter Parker? And he goes, these people don't know the character, but I know that you do. And I said, and when he says, I know that you do, John Romita Sr. lived in the town adjacent to mine on Long Island, and I went to high school with his oldest son, Vic, and his obviously younger son, John Romita Jr. So I got to know the Romita family while I was still in high school. And John was kind of a mentor to me initially anyway. So very happy for me when I got to work at DC, et cetera, et cetera. So at any rate, I go up there and I meet Jim Shooter. And he's telling me about, I guess, the Marvel way of doing comics. And, he has this spinner rack in his office and he pulls out this issue of Avengers #3 drawn by Jack Kirby. And so he goes to this one page where he says, this is storytelling at its best, Jack Kirby. And he says, you see, you can get all these full figures into a panel and you don't have to do constantly close-ups like they do here and there at other companies. And he says, look at this panel. You got the Hulk at the end of a train and he's throwing this caboose at Giant Man and Iron Man all in the same panel, and there's room for a caption up above, and the Hulk has some kind of an expletive to throw at the Avengers, and it's all there. And he says, he goes, you don't need a giant panel to show it, it's right here. So he says, this is the importance of storytelling. And I said, okay, sure, no problem. So then it was a short discourse, and then from there I went in to meet Sol Brodsky and John Romita, and they got the story, and I went home, and I drew it. And that was at 1980, and as I said, that was the one time I met Jim early on. Then I didn't get back to Marvel again until 1986, when things kind of dried up for me doing Superman at DC, because they were bringing in the new guard. Jerry Ordway, Marv Wolfman, John Byrne, all these people were going to revamp Superman and bring the sales up, hopefully. So at any rate, I called up when I turned in my last Superman story and I had nothing to go home with. I called up John and I said, hey, you have anything for me? He goes, yeah, bring your stuff over. He says, we need fill-ins all the time because these people here at Marvel, they don't know how to make deadlines. So he says, you could make a living just being a fill-in guy. I said, okay, great. So I walked over, left some of my current Xeroxes on his table. And a couple of days later, I was called up by Michael Higgins, an editor on the New Universe line of books that Jim Shooter had created. And But at the same time, he also was editing Iron Man. So my first job up there was filling in on an Iron Man book, Iron Man number 211, in case you want to look it up. It's got Living Laser on the cover, and Iron Man's in his cool pose, and he's blasting him. Okay. But that was my one and only issue of Iron Man. But after that...
Who inked it?
Sam De La Rosa.
Sam De La Rosa.
Nice.
Yes. A cool anecdote about that particular story was that there was a show that Spielberg came out with a couple of years later called Amazing Stories.
Of course.
And Howard Mackey that was Howard Mackey's first writing story at Marvel, my first art job. And one of these stories that was on that TV show was about this kid who was exhibiting certain powers at 14 or 15, and it turns out he was an alien that was dropped off early on when he was a kid, almost like a Superman type thing, but not really. But at any rate, and the parents come back while he's still a teenager. But the kid loved comics, and there was this one scene where he had a whole bunch of comics strewn about on his floor, and right there, smack in the middle, was our Iron Man cover. And, with this pose of Iron Man doing this, and the kid looks in the mirror and he goes,
"Oh, that's
like
great."
That. So that was really a cool moment.
Yeah.
But after I did that, I did a few fill-ins on other things. And then shortly after, Mike comes to me and he says, "Hey, listen, I got another fill-in for you, but I don't know if you want to take it." I said, "Why is that?" He says, "Well, it's for Jim Shooter's Star Brand story. He needs a fill-in on number 3. I said, "What happened to John Jr.?" He goes, "Oh, he's just finishing up some other project, but, he doesn't want to rush it, so we need a fill-in." And he says, "But, I said, "So why wouldn't I want to do it?" He says, "Because, Jim can sometimes, eat artists for breakfast." And I said, "Oh." I said, "Well, I've been doing my thing for 10 years. I know what I'm doing. And I've already had some experience with Jim, so I kind of know what he wants." So he says, "Okay, well, wait in his office, and he'll be in shortly." I go in there, and there's a gentleman sitting at the art board, and I look over his shoulder, and I recognize the layout says Steve Ditko. And so I got to introduce myself to Steve Ditko. Now, mind you, in the early 60s, the Spider-Man annual came out, and there was a story in the back that said, "How Stan and Steve Create Spider-Man." Little 5-page funny story, right? And Ditko had drawn a caricature of himself in that story. And lo and behold, like 24 or 25 years later, he still looked like the same guy in that Spider-Man annual. You could recognize him immediately. And so I introduced myself, and he was rather soft-spoken, and we just exchanged a few words. And then Jim comes in, and he goes, "Hi, Alex, this is Steve Ditko." I said, "Yeah, we've met already." And Steve said bye, and he left, and then we started talking, and he was telling me, he goes, "Well, listen, the way I do plots," he says, "most people, when they first start working with me, they'll take my 22-page plot and they'll end up doing thumbnails for 27, 28, 29 pages. And that's okay. Bring it in. We'll sit down together. We'll weed out the stuff that we don't need. Whatever. I'll do the editing right there, and then you can take it home and pencil it." I said, "Okay, fine." So I left with that script, the plot, I should say, and I was taking the train home and had my pencil out, and I'm reading this plot, and lo and behold, when I got to the final page in the final paragraph, that was page 22. So I said, "Oh, wow, I guess I got it right the first time," which is great. So I went home and I did some really tight layouts for him, and thumbnails on 8.5 by 11 paper, kind of like the way Neil Adams used to do it ages ago, and then blow it up on a light box or something. And because I felt confident that I was doing a good job. So I brought it in, and he looked at it, and he liked it, and then he says, "I want to expand this one section here. It looks like it could use a couple of more pages. And you did everything right, according to what I had written." But he says, "I see now that we could make it even better." And so he got on the phone, and he called up whatever the advertising section. He goes, "Hello, this is Shooter, issue 3, Star Brand. I need 2 more pages." Okay, hung up the phone. I went home. I said, to draw up those pages. And he says, "Now, you don't have to come back with the layouts. I trust you'll do a fine job." And so I went home and then basically just redrew my layouts, came back in. He wasn't there when I delivered, but Mike Higgins, the editor, took the job. And on my way home, I get a phone. My wife says, "Oh, Jim Shooter's office just called. And I said, oh, wow, I thought that the job was okay. I hope it's okay. And again, I didn't speak with Jim, but I spoke with the editor, and he just said that, hey, Jim really liked what you're doing, and to keep you here, he wants to give you a really big raise. And I said, okay, I'm your guy. No, I hate money. No, but I said, hey, I'm your guy. So that was how I stayed at Marvel. I never left. So
That's beautiful.
But that was the only 2 times I really interacted with Jim.
Oh, that's great. A good contrast to Walter, obviously, as well. That's fantastic. Brett, we haven't heard from you yet, and
Oh boy.
So whatever direction you want to go in, Brett. As you were telling me yesterday, you had a lot of you had a lot of good after hour hang with Jim as well.
I got to know Jim. I don't know. I didn't know enough about him personally, but when I was in high school, I set samples in junior to year of high school to Stan, and Stan's secretary wrote back and said the person I need to send them to was Jim Shooter. And to my surprise, as a 16, 17-year-old, I got a letter back with my samples from Jim with real advice. He was talking about, looking at my brother or real trees, and just don't follow what you see in the comics. Learn to draw this and that. And basically all I did was a 2-page, this idea of Captain America walking down the street. Here's an alarm in a bank, goes to the bank, takes out the thugs. Just something quick to do some samples, blue line samples. And he saw something in the pencils that he gave me encouragement. And he says, if you really, I can really see it. If you stick with this and, that there's something here that if you work at it, you could make this happen. And I needed that at the time because my family didn't want me to pursue going into comics. They went to school. I was in a Votech in a commercial art program. They went in, saw my teacher, tried to get my teacher to, because I was good at this, that, and the other. But comics, he's going to be living in an attic, starving, all this kind of stuff. And that letter helped keep me focused because it was something I wanted to do from the time I was 8 years old. I was such a fan of Buscema and Palmer's Avengers back in the 60s that at that point I was like, boy, I would love to do this. And I always stuck with it. And Jim was the first person who really had cred to give me encouragement. So jump ahead 2 years later, 2 days after I graduate high school, I meet Bob Layton. He's talking about, assistants, and I didn't know anything about how the business worked. I'm living in Delaware. I assumed everybody had to live in New York and work there. And a couple months later, I end up working for Bob Layton as his assistant, inking John Romita Jr. and Jerry Bingham's backgrounds on Iron Man. And he started taking me into New York. And of course, I used to always go in a suit because it's a business. And I remember once making the mistake of going in a corduroy suit. And Jim loved that because he could tell I was coming around. But Bob Layton and Jim Shooter at that time were like joined at the hip. They were close friends. I think Bob was more of a hanger-on than anything. But every time we went into the city, Jim took us out somewhere, the Playboy Club or some fancy dinner or whatever. And I think I was like the little sidekick. They used to call me the clone, and I was kind of baby-faced back then like Bob. That was his nickname. And I was inking like Bob at that time. So I was like the little radioactive something clone or whatever. And I guess he took a liking to me, but he always was very kind. And by going up to the office, I met Al and Louise Jones, who now is Louise Simonson, as editors there, and they started giving me background work for some of their artists, working for Joe Sinnott. I did work for Al and other people, so I got to know the editors, and I got to be known around Marvel, and after about a year, I felt like I really want to try doing this on my own. Well, right? Like I feel, the goal, yeah. I feel I might be ready. How wrong I was, but I thought I was ready. And Jim's advice was, because I grew up wanting to be a Marvel comic book artist. I wasn't interested in DC. I didn't really collect a lot of DCs. So I wanted to be specifically a Marvel artist, and Jim's advice was, go over to DC, get some work, cut your teeth over there, screw some jobs up, and when you're ready, you can come back. And so that's what happened. I went over to D.C. Len Wein gave me my first job. And at some point, Marvel finally started giving me a page here, page there, cover, and then offering me work. And I was getting my own stuff and leaving D.C. Len didn't want me to go. He's like, well, don't we have something here that we could give you and that you'd want to do? And I was like, well, I'd love to work on Garcia Lopez, but oh, yeah, we don't have anything right now. So I went to Marvel, which is ultimately where I wanted to be. And at some point, after being there, I don't know, 6 months maybe, DC calls with a 16-page Batman versus the Joker Garcia Lopez story. And I was like, oh, boy, how can I turn that down? So I went into Jim. I had developed a good relationship with Jim where I could sit and talk to him and stuff. So I went in, sat with him, and I said, I'm in a dilemma. I always wanted to be a Marvel artist, but boy, I just would love to do this. And, but I don't want to not be able to come back. And he says, well, don't we have anything here that you would want to do like that? And I says, well, my whole reason for being in comics is John Buscema. I would love to ink John Buscema, but there's never anything available. And he stands up, all 6'7" of him, and he says, follow me. So you go walking down the hall with him up here and me way down here, down to Louise Jones' office. And he says, Louise, I got a guy here. He wants to ink John Buscema. Have we got anything for him? And she says, oh, yeah, let me look. She looks. I got home with a 20-page Conan story.
Fantastic.
And, well,
or not.
You might have thought, but it was one of John's breakdowns.
Oh, okay.
And John's breakdowns, if you know what you're doing, you know everything is there. And it is sparse. I mean, it'll be a little line here for this bus, but it's all there. And trying to figure out, like, how do I render this? Where did I was in over my head.
Can I interject for just a second?
Sure, absolutely.
I've inked John Buscema's breakdowns, and everything is not there. There's a world of knowledge and talent that went into making these little chicken scratchings that he did, and you can... My experience was you look at it and it's, oh, this is so great. And it's like a gesture drawing, it's very loose. And breakdowns are basically, the idea is it's the storytelling and the drawing, but without any detail, not any great detail or spotting of blacks or textures or anything. It's sort of like the coloring book version of a comic book. As opposed to full pencils.
Well, every artist has a different level too. Like Ron Friend's breakdowns are all there.
Oh yeah.
But John's probably were more towards a layout. But when I say everything was there, I mean that all the essential things. I mean, the structure was amazing.
Yeah.
The movement, everything.
Beautiful.
And like the lines didn't all connect, but the lines you needed were there. Like, okay, the muscle turns here. There's a little, but you still have to pull all that together as an inker. I was in over my head. I fear when people come up to my table and ask me to sign these things now because I'm like, and it's not as cringeworthy as I remember it, but I feel like, oh, I butchered this. And but Jim obviously wanted me to stay at Marvel, and throughout my time there, anytime I wanted to try something, not just be an inker, and Bob Layton was kind of, I guess, a model in that he was an inker, but he was doing plotting and everything, so I didn't feel an inker had to be confined to just that.
Right.
And initially I always thought I'd draw comics, but I'm more detail oriented and so I think that is where my mindset goes. It was a good fit for me, but I wanted to color, and I was always an idea guy, and that was kind of my strength in the Superman books. But I never wanted to write. I thought, I don't know, this whole thing with dialogue, no, but I got ideas. So at one point I mentioned this to Jim, coloring, and he got up and he gave me a brand new box of Dr. Martin dyes and some brushes and a 6-page, 8-page job to take home that night. And I got home and I did all the figures, and I knew what I wanted to do with the lighting, and I was really a fan of what Tom Palmer and Klaus Janson colored a lot of their own stuff, and they were fabulous.
Beautiful.
And so that stuff I knew, but when I got to the backgrounds, I choked. And I took the job in, like within the week, and I said, Jim, I'm in over my head. I'm not really sure what to do. And he was like, don't worry about it. He says, we'll get somebody else to finish it. He says, just keep working at it. What he saw, he liked. I think he appreciated the fact that I didn't just botch it and, be late on it or whatever. But then a year or so later, I had an idea for a Hawkeye, Nighthawk. And I talked to Dave Michelini about it. And I broached it to Jim, and Jim set us up to do a 4-issue miniseries.
Wow.
So that I could co-plot it and draw it, ink it with. And I tried to get John Buscema to do it, and he was too busy. I tried to get Sal to do it, and he called Jim up going, "What are you doing, Senator? I got too much work now. Are you sending guys to give me work? I don't need work." And I'm like, he didn't send him. I went to a convention and asked him, as a fan of his, if he would be willing to do it. I ended up getting Ron Friends on board, but he didn't stick with it enough because he was just as bad with his deadlines as I was, and so it just fell apart. And but Dave and I plotted a general outline for the entire story, and did a full plot for the first two. We were paid for it. And there are some panels that are broken down or whatever, but it was a whole new take on, and it wasn't the same Nighthawk. It was a whole different twist in the way his powers worked. And the irony is, when the Batman animated series came out, Ron, from when he worked on the plot, says, this feels a lot like what you were doing with, because there were elements all through that were things we were introducing into the character. So apparently it would have been a popular idea, but it fell apart when Jim got let go from Marvel. And Tom DeFalco took over, and Tom couldn't see the point of, there was something about it that he didn't see, and so he axed it.
Oh, wow.
So it never
came out?
It never came out. It never went forward. We
That's
tried
like
to
studios.
get it. We tried to get it done.
That's like studio heads when they change regimes.
Yeah.
And a lot of things to get killed.
He was like, because one of the thing was, the guy that played Nighthawk, or was Nighthawk, Kyle Richmond, dies, and his fortune is left to a nephew who's kind of a street urchin kind of a guy, and he takes this over, and he's got guys coming after him, and he gets the serum to try, to see what it'll do.
Sure.
To help him be able to stand up against these guys.
Yeah.
And Tom's idea with it was that, there's nothing new about, guys that have nothing and then have money, and and it didn't interest him, and he didn't see all the other cool stuff that was different. But anyway, it went away. It was hard to see it go. But Jim supported me through that, and I had no credentials for it. But I've seen him do that with other people as well, coming up through the business, where he was very encouraging, trying to help people do things, if they wanted to expand and do whatever, and giving very good advice. I remember at DC doing Red Tornado in a Justice League, and then coming up to Marvel with backgrounds and stuff. This is before they hired me. And I'd show him my stuff, like, am I getting there yet? Am I getting there yet? And he'd look at the way I did the Tornado. And being an assistant of Bob Layton, Bob was very big on ruling everything. Templates. And so I was using oval templates to make this go around, And I got to the point where I didn't have the confidence to do freehand stuff. And Jim was like, "No, it's too mechanical. It doesn't work. So you want to try it this way." And he sat there and he drew it and he says, "Just do it this way. This will work better." I would get little bits of advice from him over the years like that were really more about adjusting the way I was thinking about what I was doing than telling me a specific way, like how to do it. But that advice sticks with me to a lot of everything he ever told me. Sticks with me, because what always impressed me about Jim, and Mike Carlin is the same way, by the way. Mike is a fabulous editor to work for. And many of my editors have been. Al was a great editor for me. But that they can do more than just the thing you know him for, Like Jim wasn't just a writer and editor-in-chief. He could draw. He understood the coloring, So when he gave you advice, it wasn't just because he was in charge and giving you advice as the boss. He could give it to you because he understood all of those different elements. And it was really good advice that helped me develop as an artist.
He was a good mentor, Jim, or
Yeah.
and could be in any case. And he did know all the aspects of the business. Where some people had issues with him is he had very strong opinions on how things should be done, which you'd expect from the boss. But
He tried
sometimes
to impose a lot of that.
Sometimes he wanted to impose. He said, I know how this is done, and this is the way it's done. And if you don't do it this way, then either you're doing it wrong, or you're flying in the face of what is clearly great advice.
Oh.
And we're all freelancers, and artistic people. It's like herding cats, as the saying goes. We don't like, let me go home and do my work. I don't need to have this, micromanaging exactly going on. And that became an issue. I'd like to, backtrack a little. When Jim became editor-in-chief, the first thing he did, Marvel was having all kinds of problems. The books were late. All the writer-editors, because I question whether you can really properly edit your own stuff.
Sure.
Because, there's ego involved, and also you don't want to make your life any more difficult. But that whole string of guys who were crossed off the list of editors-in-chief usually left the position and said, well, I'm going to write and edit these X number of titles, 3 titles, 4 titles, whatever, Len and Marv and Jerry Conway. Jerry, I think, was planning on doing about 9 books a month and taking work away from everybody else. But, and that lasted a month or less. And then he ended up going to D.C. and doing a lot of writing there. But, we were missing deadlines. Books were either not getting to the engraver on time, or they weren't getting to the printer on time, and then the books weren't getting published on time, and then they weren't getting distributed when they were supposed to be distributed, and all these stops along the way to creating a comic book were charging penalty fees and late fees, and it was costing Marvel a huge amount of money. Plus, if somebody missed a deadline, they'd say, "Oh my God, we'll do a reprint issue," and even though they'd been around for a while by now, they were still they'd be reprinting stuff from like 3 years earlier. It wasn't like, nobody's forgotten that one yet. Don't we have anything else? No, because the company was too young. The new incarnation of the company. So Jim went to the powers that be at Marvel, the owners and the accountants and those people, and he said, "Look, I can't work like this. It's insane to try and get these people to inflict their deadlines on themselves. I want to hire an editorial staff, and then they'll ride herd on these writers. They'll go back to being freelancers and not their own editors." And the people upstairs blanched and went, "You mean we're going to have to hire 5 or 6 new editors? That the salaries alone will be $1.25." I mean, the salaries at that time were incredibly low. I think my salary at DC when I edited there one year was maybe $12,000 a year. Now, it was a long time ago, so that wasn't as bad as it sounds, but it certainly wasn't great either. And
living in New York.
Living in New York, et cetera, et cetera. But I was also freelancing my brains out, which they let us do at that time. I think now in a lot of cases they won't. If you're on staff,
you're exclusive.
You can't. Well, yes, but you also can't even do freelance. If you're an editor at DC, you can't draw Batman comics. And if you're an editor at Marvel, you can't do X-Men, whatever.
Sure.
So he said, they said, we can't possibly afford that. And he said, no, you can't possibly afford not to do it. And he sat down with them and said, how much are we paying in late fees and penalties? And they looked at the books and they said, oh my God, we didn't realize how bad it was. And so they said, okay, hire a staff. So he hired me. He hired, at some point he hired Grunwald. I believe he hired Salicrup.
Okay. Yeah, Jim Salicrup.
Jim Salicrup.
Louise
came in, I think, was she before or after me? I don't remember.
How about Fingeroff? Was he one of those guys as well, or was that later?
That was a little later,
okay.
But that would have been, I think, under Jim's...
Macchio?
Ralph Macchio, correct, and
DeFalco, of course.
And once I was up there, and I'd been working because DC let me go because they had the DC implosion.
Yeah.
I won't go into that, but it was
That's another panel.
Yeah, it was supposed to be the DC explosion, and instead it was the DC implosion, and that's So I had been up at DC working as an editor for 1 year, almost to the day. And Shooter called me up and he said, "Hey, Al, come on over. I think we might have something for you." And I thought he meant freelancing, because I just thought, oh, okay, that was my exciting career as an editor, 1 year at DC, and now I'll just go back to freelancing. I really hadn't planned on being an editor for the rest of my life or career. I just was curious about what it was like to be on the other side of the desk. So, but now here I had some experience. And so that gave me a certain luster in Jim's eyes. This guy was already an editor, and we can make him into an even better editor over here.
You cut your teeth at DC.
I cut my teeth at DC. That's what that was what we were doing. So, so anyway, and then I was up there for a certain length of time, and he said, "Hey, Al, do you think Larry Hama, who had also been an editor at DC when I was up there, he'd been up there a little earlier, I believe, than I was." So he said, "Do you think Larry would like to, come work on staff?" And I said, "I call him up. I don't know, maybe." And he said, "No, call him, take him out to lunch, feel him out, see what he thinks." I said, "Okay, we'll do." So I invited Larry. We went and had a very nice lunch on Marvel's dime, and chatted about this, that, and everything else. And then at the end, I said, "By the way, Larry, Shooter, was interested to know if you'd like to come work on staff at Marvel." And he said, "Oh, yeah, that sounds pretty good." So I went back after like a 3-hour lunch, avoiding work at the office, and I said, "Jim, Larry's interested." So and Jim said, "Oh, okay, well, good." And he hired Larry, who's a terrific writer, of course, and had an unbelievably long string of scripts on G.I. Joe.
Of course.
And not only at Marvel, but now whoever's publishing
Hasbro and everything
this week, but he's a very talented artist. I don't know how many people know that, but he started out working as an assistant for Wally Wood, one of the all-time great cartoonists, and Larry's a very capable storyteller, and he draws really well, and I'm surprised not more people had tapped him to use his artistic ability as well.
Absolutely,
but. On Larry's behalf, he probably figured it's easier to write than to draw.
Sure.
And less time consuming. So
speaking of time, forgive me, Al, because we are running late.
Again, yeah.
And I apologize because you're telling great information. Does anyone have questions? And if they do, can they come up?
Yeah, because we've been all over the place and not focusing maybe as much on Jim.
But mentioning Larry on Facebook told a great story about Jim.
Oh,
where
let's hear it.
A freelancer. They were trying to get insurance, and the guy, unfortunately, he didn't identify the artist, but the guy obviously was going through some sort of health issue, really needed the insurance. And sadly, he passed away before getting the insurance. But Jim knew that he was trying so hard, so he still put through the paperwork like the guy was still alive, and then told the bosses a few months after he had passed, "Oh, I'm sorry, he passed away." So, of course, he needs his death benefits. So the widow at least got compensation for his time and everything. And, yeah, he kept him on the books, even though the guy had passed for a couple months. And I know certainly all the...
Sneaky.
It's sneaky, but very effective. And also, again, by the way, I should say, because obviously Jim is not here to talk about what he did, but I did a great interview with Jim right here at Terrificon a couple of years ago. And I've made this, I've transcribed it. Eventually the Word Balloon book will come out. I've talked about it for years. But I do have copies, and if you guys are interested in picking it up, forgive the hard sell. But it's $5. It's 24 pages. It's the size of a comic. And it's a good bathroom read, good airport read, good plane read if you're, kind of whatever.
And of course, you'll comp me in.
Oh, of course. Oh, if you'd like them.
I'd love a copy.
Oh, it'd be my pleasure, guys.
And real quickly.
Guys on the panel get it for free.
Thank you. Before we take questions, real quickly, Jim, the things that he did that were great. He got Marvel on schedule and on time.
Yep.
And very ingenious ways that he did it. But he did. He had this editorial staff, and now boom, they got the books on time. It was a process, but they got there. And then things became a little problematic because now that he had the time and everything was running smoothly, he wanted to make the books better, and he wanted to make them perfect. And what's the saying? Perfect is the enemy of the good. We were doing good comics. It's hard to do a perfect comic. You can always find something, and Jim always did. That was maybe the problem some people had. He could be very critical, and especially he envisioned it a certain way, and if you didn't match his vision, then he might not have been doing it right. But he did, along the way, he matched DC's royalty program,
Yes, indeed.
which made a lot of freelancers much, much more solvent than they had ever been. After decades of the companies crying, we can't possibly pay you any more money, it turned out, they could pay us more money. And especially if the books were selling well, you'd make more and more money. So, the X-Men, Spider-Man, the good selling books would do great, and almost all the freelancers benefited to a certain degree. Also, he did not want to see any of us end up like Siegel and Schuster, who created Superman, obviously, and and then later in life were impoverished, and they didn't have any rights to keep their own character. And he introduced something called a new character agreement, where if you created new characters for Marvel, you would have participation in any profits they made down the line. And so if it became a movie or a TV show or a video game or a lunchbox or a Funko Pop, any of those things, you would get money. And it was
Starlin is a great example of that.
Oh, the greatest,
bringing
maybe, yeah.
Thanos to Marvel, and reminded everybody right in the middle of production of the Avengers, excuse me, I'm the creator of Thanos. I'm owed some money. And he was telling us yesterday that the powers that be are like, yeah, you do. And Jim's been taken care of by Marvel. He seems to be happy with his compensation on the back end. Again, you'll forgive me, but Jim, and I want to acknowledge his great work as a writer, not only at DC, but of course Secret Wars. And Al was the artist on Secret Wars 2. But Jim really went into some fantastic stories about how, unfortunately, the upper supervisors that were selling Marvel and marketing Marvel didn't know what they had. He has a great story about how a marketer comes in and goes, "Hey, I sold a great deal for Wonder Woman." And he's like, we don't have Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Not one of our characters.
That's right.
And she was so mad. But I made this great deal. Again, Jim tells the story, and it's in this book. So anyway. But, please,
If
Brett.
I can just expand on that one
Please,
little bit.
absolutely.
The thing about the royalties that's funny is when I was in that process of coming to Marvel and leaving DC, one of the things that Len was pushing me to keep me there was they had just instituted their royalty program. Marvel's wasn't in place yet. And when I mentioned it to Jim, going over there, going out with him one evening, he says, "No, we're working on that. Trust me, we're working on it. And you're going to be better if you're here because Marvel comics sell." And he wasn't wrong, because my first royalty check from DC was less than the postage it took to mail it to me. So I still have a copy of that at home because it's just so ridiculous.
Are you guys still collecting?
That's what they call a Pyrrhic victory.
Are you guys getting royalty checks for everything? Alex, are you still getting? Al? Yeah.
I get reprint checks.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I meant. Basically, when
Really?
stuff
I
is still
thought
in
they
print.
got rid of those.
Well, and
No.
Oh, I've been told that
you better
get reprints anymore.
you better get a phone call.
I only get royalties. Yeah, that when they went bankrupt, that they no longer have to pay that contracts.
Well,
they don't
maybe,
have to honor it.
Maybe it's a semantic kind of situation, because I get these accounting sheets. That,
Sure.
Either
Statements.
an email, and then ultimately they mail it to me.
Yeah.
Listing all the things, and what did I do? Inking. So maybe it's a percentage rather than a flat.
Yeah,
imprint
I mean
rate.
it's hard to
So
see
like
what
I
they're
said,
doing.
Understood.
semantics,
But the one last thing I wanted
Please.
to say too was about Jim was getting toward the end of his tenure at Marvel, getting more.
Micromanaging?
Yeah, and he had these little talks he would give. He had the inkers talk, he had the writers talk, or whatever. And I'd heard about the inkers talk, and it was a lot of it had to do with, if you had blacks in the foreground, you couldn't have them in the middle ground or the background. It always had to be this way or that way.
Minutia.
And so I was curious to hear, because his advice had always been good to me. And Mike Carlin, who was at that time having a lot of problems, Jim was trying to get him to fire people he didn't like on his books, and Mike was just like pulling his hair out. And I was working for Mike on Thundercats at the time. And I says, yeah, I'm going to go ask him about this. He said, don't do it. Don't do it. Oh, God, don't do it. You're not going to have work. You're going to get canned. You're going to regret it. And he was so effusive in trying to keep me from going and talking to Jim. And I thought, well, I have this relationship with Jim from when I was this little kid with Bob. So I went in and I asked him, what's the talk I'm hearing about? And one of the things personally he was trying to do with me and Ron Friends, who were on Spider-Man at the time, was Ron had started adopting this thing Walt did in his comics, leaving a white outline around dark characters that were on a dark background to separate them. And Jim hated that. And it was like, well, Walt can do it because Walt can break the rules, but it doesn't work for anybody else. We shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. And I said, well, Jim, I don't do it just because of that, because Ron does it. I says, as a photographer, I says, you can take a photograph of something dark against a dark night sky and you will still see it because the values are a little different or whatever. And when you're working with black and white, we don't have that unless I use a massive amount of zipatone on the sky or, what I do is I would leave a color note on those panels and ask the colorist to fill in that white outline. So it was there to separate everything, but it was pushed back. And the colorist would never do it. They'd leave the outline white.
God.
And I said, so the colorist, and he never pushed me to change that. And I always thought it was because, and Carla and I talked about this later, I says, everybody's so afraid. And I'm not up here all the time, so I can't question why. But in my case, it felt like, because I had a reason that I could articulate to him as to why I was doing it, that I wasn't just doing it as a thing like, I saw it somewhere. I had a thought process for why I did it. And so he wasn't telling me it was okay, but he didn't make me change it like he had with other people. He was like, okay, well, but I don't see it that way, and this is really the way it should be done. And, so at least in my experience, I was able to, he'd be a little bit more reasonable or, not quite as, but I was friends with a lot of people up there that were close with him that were on the bad end of some of that. So I'm aware of that as well. But in my own personal experience, he was always, if you just talk to him.
And I had the same sort of.
Alec, forgive me, we're out of time.
No, we're doing it again.
We're totally out of time. But please go talk to these guys more. And thank them for the excellent anecdotes. This is a great panel. Really appreciate it, guys. Well done, all of you. Absolutely.
Thanks for coming.
Yes.